Sunday, right here on twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. It's the Plex. 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific and on into red light. We have the worst news in the week that no one else will cover. The Plex has it all. Conspiracy, right-wing nut jobs, Christian extremism, and Madison Star Moon. Tune in every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/Echoplex Media and find our full schedule at echoplexmedia.com.
Yeah, you effin' with some wet-ass P-word. P-word is female genitalia.
I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. If I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do this live every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. Welcome live viewers, welcome podcast listeners. Podcast listeners specifically, though, I got to talk to y'all. There's a lot of you that download this show and ain't none of you joining our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Echoplex. If you join at the $5 level, you get the audio recording straight off the board, and you got our local video recording of the show, without all any problems that come from transmission. It's a higher bit rate and whatnot. And you get that a day early. So I don't know, think about joining our Patreon, because most of our money comes from Twitch, and Jeff Bezos is taking half of that. So anyway, I'm Producer Dave, and you can find me on Grindr.
And I am HK Perrin. You can find me on Mastodon at hperrin@port87.social. You can also find me on GitHub if you want to interact with my code and my open source projects at hperrin on GitHub.
Fantastic. The band last night, they found us because the drummer was actually a Port 87 social.
That is super fucking cool.
It's coincidence, I think. I didn't ask too much about it because we weren't there talking about Port 80. Well, I wasn't even hosting the show, which is most of the reason why I didn't ask about it. Chip was hosting the show. But pretty cool.
Yeah, Mastodon has been really awesome. Basically, since I switched off of Birdsight, I've been much more enjoying going on social media. Like I have not liked social media since probably around like 2019. Around 2019, I was just like, I don't like it. I'm going to try and get off of it. And then I started using my Facebook less and less. And then Facebook just banned me. So I was like...
You did steal their umbrella.
I did. And I've used Twitter less and less and less. And then I just haven't been on social media at all since, or like hardly at all since 2019. And moving to Mastodon, it's like how social media was in the beginning. It's fun. It's nice. People are awesome.
Or at least decent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could get off Twitter, but I mean, I can't. Like to do this show particularly, if I want to get interview guests or, if I want to dunk on Matt Walsh or whatever, which is probably how a lot of people find me. I mean, I have to be doing that on Twitter. But anyway, another person I like to dunk on and we haven't visited in a while is David Fuller. So this is from a few months back, and this is another interview in which he basically won't just admit that he's naive and just thinks anybody who puts academic window dressing on what they're saying is smart. This is what happened to Jordan Peterson. I can tell you what happened to Jordan Peterson. Beef and benzos and beef daughter happened to him.
I mean, Jordan Peterson was never like good. He's always been shitty. Like since fucking 12 Rules for Life. I guess since before that. I didn't really know him at all before that. But since 12 Rules for Life, he's been shitty. Oh, I got a thing over my face.
Not anymore. I moved
Oh, wait.
You liked it?
Yeah, put that back over my face.
Fuck that. So anyway, we're going to watch him. So one of the things that I want to maybe bring up first before we do this is he saw that he had made some mistakes with getting like buddy with Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson. But now he's like buddies with these weird sense-making gurus like Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger. And these people, I think, are like almost worse than Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein in a way. And we haven't dug too deep into them except for Daniel Schmachtenberger. And I think we mostly just did that because that's one hell of a name.
It's hard to be worse than Jordan Peterson, though. I mean, the guy like praises Hitler.
Yeah, just in different ways, though. Anyway, this is from the Unheard podcast. Fun fact, both of the people you'll see on screen here in this piece of content we're watching have blocked me on Twitter for different reasons.
Hello and welcome to Unheard Ideas. I'm Freddie Zayers. I'm here with David Fuller, founder of Rebel Wisdom, which is one of our favorite YouTube channels, which sadly is coming to the end of its life, but you are continuing to explore.
Has been for the past year?
Mm-hmm. You have been.
They did finally do their last thing. It was like a campfire video or something, but it was over Zoom. I don't know. It was just a Brady Bunch list of all the pensioners he's been scamming out of $500 to $700 for Zoom calls
in the past week, because you came out with a long article about Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. This is someone who you could almost say was intimately involved with the rise of Rebel Wisdom. You did some early interviews with him, and many of your fans came from his kind of world in 2017, 2018. And you've broken with him, basically. You wrote how you're no longer a fan, or you no longer think that he is a positive contribution to the public debate. Tell us what your argument is.
So, as you say, I first discovered Jordan Peterson in about 2017. I was hugely taken with his thought, and still.
And mostly he probably liked the transphobia.
Probably, yeah. I believe that's what everyone that flocked to him liked in 2017. That's like why he became popular. He was super transphobic.
Still think that what he's saying about mythology, the Bible series, the Maps of Meaning lectures are really quite extraordinary contributions. And
no, they're not. No, they're not. You're just a sucker who gets fucking anybody who puts on an air of being intelligent and does it in like a certain like way with it, just the right amount of academic window dressing. This guy will fall for all kind of bullshit.
You know, if it would get him to pay me for like an interview, I could pretend to be, the most intelligent and the most humble man in the world. I think right now that honor goes to Eric Weinstein, but I could, rescind that award from him and award it to myself instead. I think honestly, the humility award, really, if I'm not awarding it to myself, really, what is it for? Because I am the most humble.
When Rebel Wisdom started, we were talking a lot about kind of the spiritual depth of his work, the religious depth of his work, more than the culture war side. And there were always multiple Jordan Petersons. There was the kind of culture warrior, obviously how he became famous through Bill C-16. But
through lying about Bill C-16, sir.
He found this incredible depth of thought, and he was incredibly influential, probably became the world's most most famous public intellectual in the last 5 years. And I've described him as like the one-man lightning rod for the culture war. So an incredibly significant figure and significant story to understand. And as I said, there were multiple Jordan Petersons, and we were really looking mostly at the kind of deeper mythology, the deeper trends of his thoughts and what he was bringing into the culture, which I still think, as I said, is hugely valuable. And
what parts of it were valuable? What does he mean parts of? He probably just means the interviews he did with Jordan, right?
Probably. Yeah, I would say like out of Jordan's work, really there was nothing valuable ever. Anything that I would agree with that Jordan has had to say in any like interview or book or anything was something so obvious anyway that like anyone could have said it, and many people did say it.
Right,
They
and
just
anything
didn't
novel he
also
said was
pepper in the transphobia.
right, and anything novel he said was cuckoo birds.
Yeah.
Was really tracking that kind of that side of the Jordan Peterson. And what I felt has happened over the last 5 years, and completely understandably in a way, given there are a lot of unfair attacks on him, he was misrepresented a lot by the media.
Which one is unfair? There's a lot of attacks on him, sure. Which one is unfair?
I mean, we might be responsible for 1 to 2% of the things he calls attacks.
Like, he's not saying what is an unfair attack on Jordan Peterson.
I think he probably means calling him a bigot. These people hate that. All of these, like, I call them the very smart people club. And I, to some extent, tried to court online friendships with some of them. And I found out that was a mistake because the very smart people club will never say that, like, Jordan Peterson is an anti-queer bigot, right?
Even though he very obviously is.
That's his claim to fame. I mean, that and like, writing his name in crushed up benzodiazepine before panko crusting a steak with it and eating the steak in the benzos and nothing else.
In 2018.
And telling you to clean your room.
It was a kind of filter for free thinkers back.
Which I need to do. I got a bunch of stuff over here that's all like clutter.
Community. I found they weren't the typical young lost man as the kind of media kind of narrative would say it. There were a lot of people from all different backgrounds. So he was a filter for free thinkers.
Except not a lot of women were in his audience. Like, just not a lot of women and not a lot of queer people. So it was just a lot of, and the myth that he was mostly talking to like young men. Okay, that's pretty, yeah. It's like, that's going to be a lot of people probably in my age cohort that were attracted to Jordan Peterson if you were like do the metrics.
Mm-hmm. To the extent that there were any women in his audience, they were probably there with their boyfriend, nudging them in the arm, going, "Can we fucking leave? This guy is awful.
It smells weird in here, sweetie. Can we go?"
I've seen over the last 5 years, and again, it's completely understandable given his health issues, given what's happened to him, and many of the unfair attacks. He's become more and more of a polarizing figure, and I argue in the piece.
No, he was a polarizing figure in the beginning. He started out lying about a bill that was trying to protect trans people.
Right, and it was just adding trans people to a list of already existing protections, too. And not for nothing, it was gender and gender identity, so it protected cis people, too.
Yeah.
Resembles the caricature that the worst of the media portrayals made him out to be.
What is that? What is that caricature that formerly you would have defended him from and now you think is accurate?
He now looks to me like the angry right-winger just stoking one side of the culture war without the nuance that I felt he was bringing before. He used to talk about the value of the left and the value of the right, and there was this sense of him, I felt he was trying to synthesize.
Yeah, but while he was doing that, he would just shit all over the left. And he'd never shit on the right.
He would shit, and especially trans people. Just especially trans people.
Yeah. Like, you can't say, like, yeah, there's a lot of value on both the left and so much value. Look at all this value here. But then you look at how bad the left is. And it's just so bad. Just so bad. So what's the logical conclusion here?
So
like, that's not being fair.
I think
that's the opposite of fair.
I think what did happen with a lot of these kind of cult-like online communities that maybe pushed things into like a talking about them in like a left-right way was that the people going after Jordan Peterson, there were plenty of good conservative arguments against the fucking nonsense he was saying, right? You didn't have to be a lefty or a liberal to know that like the old drawings of a snake didn't mean shit about people knowing anything about DNA or like any of the like very non-scientific science claims he made, right? You don't have to be a liberal or a lefty.
Yeah.
It's just that not just him, but also like just conspiracism more broadly. The people on that dystopia beat tend to be leftists, not just like shit libs, but leftists. And I don't know why that is. I think like a lot for maybe because the conspiracy theories tend to be anti-Semitic or whatever. That is for the conspiracy, like the anti-conspiracy people, but the anti-IDW people, I don't know where like the sensible, like moderate conservatives were on that shit. Because the fucking word salad is word salad, no matter what you believe about like the size and role of government, you know?
Yeah.
Which understands that each kind of archetype has a positive side and a negative side, and there was really deep.
When did he talk about that?
Side needs each other, and over time,
I know he did like 18 billion hours of content, but I swear, like that was not a thing that Jordan Peterson was leaning on in any meaningful way.
Yeah, like what you were talking about. He started off much more talking about like Christian philosophy. Like I remember basically like we watched very early on in Intellectual Dollar Tree, we watched a speech that he gave that was basically just all like rehashed Christian philosophy from the last like 300 or 400 years. And it was like very unoriginal, very easily countered, and has been countered.
Right. And then we watched Matt Dillahunty basically tell him that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great.
Fantastic. If anybody hasn't seen Dillahunty versus Jordan Peterson, it was so good. Because I think Jordy Pete thought he was going to go in there because it's like a new atheist type, right? He thought he was going to go in there and just kind of elbow bump about culture war shit. And Matt was not there to do that.
I found is that he steered more and more into tickling the funny bone of the right only, and much less of a synthesizing figure. And that's not just my view. I've also, because of the shared history with Jordan Peterson and the documentaries that I put out about him, I've also been part of a lot of the Facebook groups that were set up around his thought, tracking the Reddit threads, and there's been a real shift in his audience. So that was partly what I was saying, is that there seems to have been a split between the people who are really still into him because of the culture war and just want to see him kind of bashing the left, and the people who were into him for the deeper kind of mythology, the philosophical side of his thought, and many of them have been repelled by a lot of the more recent content that seems much more angry, much more, much less attempt to kind of to steer a path in the culture war.
So you're disappointed by this? You would have hoped that he would have stayed above the frame or not picked a side in this way. It's a charge that he should answer in some way.
He clearly picked a side, and he clearly believes that he's right to have picked a side. He clearly believes that the situation.
He picked a side from the beginning, though.
He should pick a side and needs to pick a side, and I can understand why he sees it that way.
Like no one thought that Jordan Peterson was a leftist in 2017. We all knew he was just some new right-wing reactionary.
Yeah, he would self-identify for a while. It was like, oh, I'm a liberal. And it's like, well, I don't care. It's the same shit that fucking Sam Harris keeps telling you he's a liberal. And then you're like, but what are you doing? Like, what do you mean? I don't give a fuck. What are you doing?
Like, at best, he's leaning right from the beginning. But I would say he was hardcore right from the beginning on most issues. Right. Certainly on any culture issue, he was all the way to the right. I don't know about his like fiscal policies, but I don't think he talks much about his fiscal policies.
No, he does. I mean, we don't talk about that stuff either, but we're not like, nobody's over here pretending that this is like a moderate channel either. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We don't have people running around being like, actually, these people are kind of moderates. And it's like, come on. Jordan Peterson was playing hide the ball, but the ball was made of benzodiazepine and then he ate it.
Other people see it that way as well. But the problem is in picking a side and being so vitriolic. And I'd advise people to go and have a look at the piece that he released after his Twitter ban, which was quite really, really off-putting.
It was a fascist fucking screed. Just these guys that none of these people, they're like, oh, it's partisan, it's culture war. They want to use all these different words, and they don't want to call this shit what it is. Like, Jordan Peterson's a fucking bigot. And once he kind of went completely mask off with it, it wasn't that Fuller cared about the bigotry. I don't think now that it's like Fuller can't pretend that isn't what it is. And so it's harder for his particular brand to be associated with someone like Jordan Peterson. That's all that happened.
Yeah. I mean, he was a bigot from the beginning. Like, it was obvious to anyone who was paying attention. I guess it took David a long enough time to figure it out that now he's like, oh, Jordan Peterson changed. It's like, no, he didn't. You just recognized him.
The way he was talking about Elliot Page.
Okay, so let's actually look at the evidence. So first of all, he tweeted something that has led to him being banned or suspended unless he deletes the tweet. Let's have a look at it. So he says, remember when pride was a sin and Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. And then he quotes
David Fuller, call him a transphobe, call him a bigot, or just shut the fuck up because it doesn't matter what you're doing here.
That tweet was probably, I would say it was the most disgusting tweet I've ever seen.
It's
the
close.
amount of vitriol and bigotry he crammed into 2 sentences is astounding.
A New York Post article about Elliot Page, which is the new name of the actor who stars in Umbrella Academy and is now a man. What's your take on this message?
Yeah, so this was kind of the inciting incident for him being suspended from Twitter. I want to make the point that this was sort of the culmination of quite a lot of tweets, including one an overweight swimwear model, but
she's not over. She's a professional athlete. Get the fuck out of here. She's just not what you think a woman should look like. That's that lady's a professional athlete. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even want to get into it. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that lady could fuck that lady, man. You want to race her, dude? You want to see who could run down the block quicker, Dave? You want to have her chasing you sometime, Dave?
Suspended. After this, he then released a long piece on his YouTube channel about this that I would call more of a rant.
Got a little excerpt of it here.
And I'm not taking down that tweet or acknowledging.
It is not a rant. It is a bigoted diatribe.
The Twitter rules. Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
So here, the first thing that strikes you is the kind of setting. He's now got this very quite well-produced, well-lit black background with a kind of halo light effect. Pinstripe sort of mobster suit. Mysterious.
Mobster is not the first thing I think
one of the commenters will tell us what it stands for. And then he's angry. Is that what you're noticing? He's quite fierce.
Yeah, I mean, I think the aesthetics are.
He's just mean.
I'll talk about that in a moment, but I'm more interested in the tone of his discussion of Ellen Page.
No, Elliot Page.
Yeah, Elliot Page.
There are limited circumstances under which you could use someone's dead name. Like if you're like the stars of this movie and then you read it and then you go, oops, that's that person's dead name. Nobody's going to come after you, right? Because you're just reading off of something. Yeah. But otherwise, like, just use the name. He's not going to say it. He's not going to say that this kind of bigotry is unacceptable and I don't like it. And that's the fucking good answer.
Yeah, I would say, especially right now, if you are okay with transphobia, then you are a transphobe, period.
Right. It's like it's the old adage, if 5 Nazis are having dinner and you join them, now there's 6.
Yep.
it's
the entire, and I wonder about playing that clip, and he talked about he defended the criminal physician's statement by saying, well, the Nazi doctors, were they criminal or not? Like that kind of language.
Well, they weren't criminal under the regime they were under, but then they fucking, some of them got put in front of the Hague for crimes against humanity. You can't fucking legislate crimes against humanity away.
I think that's going to appeal to people who are already on his side of the aisle. It's not going to persuade anyone who is not already bought into his argument already. His
argument? Like, again, they won't fucking say it. And like, this is one of the problems I have with people. There's people I genuinely like, the Gurus pod guys. They do this shit too. They won't just be like, no, that was extremely bigoted. And like, we don't, we're kind people and we don't talk that way. And we find it appalling. None of these people will just say something like that. They're like, I prefer to be kind and I find this appalling.
Yep. Yeah. Jordan Peterson's argument, quote unquote, here is that trans people shouldn't exist. So Jordan Peterson can go fuck right off.
And David Fuller too.
Yep.
And this Unheard guy too. But to be fair, the Unheard guy has gone to, you kind of hear him slowing down every time he said Elliot Page's name. The Unheard guy didn't dead name Elliot. The Unheard guy's a giant piece of shit.
And I don't understand how someone who's a clinical psychologist.
No, I like the other one.
No, you can say criminal.
I don't know how you can have this conversation.
Jordan Peterson's going to throw around the word criminal to describe people who do gender affirming care, that we could call him a criminal too. Fuck it. Now everybody's a criminal.
I mean, he was abusing benzos, which is, objectively criminal. Not that it should be.
Right.
I completely disagree that it should be, but in that way, he's a criminal.
Yeah. Also, like, not for nothing, like, he probably went doctor shopping, which is also illegal.
Yep.
Having some empathy for people who are going through gender dysphoria. Like, if you're only going to take a fully combative attitude to this, one of the most difficult topics to talk about in the culture right now.
Why? Why is it difficult? It's because of you.
I don't see how you're going to be able to do that without some nuance, without some compassion, unless you're only trying to appeal to one side of the culture war. It's a very delicate argument to have, and I think.
Or if your character is really shitty because you're a bigot, or you're a bigot because your character is really shitty, like that's also an option. I think that requires the fewest assumptions, actually. Oh, look, he's being thoughtful.
It's an argument that is starting to be won as a journalist as well. Like, even the New York Times just recently, a couple of weeks ago, had an article by, I think, Emily Bazelon. That was the first time that you'd seen the New York Times, which previously had a really blanket kind of ideological position of trans women are women and that's all there is to say. They had this long article that I think was 8 months in the making that finally kind of conceded a lot of the questions that people have been raising for a long time about the ideology. And things are starting to shift. And that's, I think, how things shift in the culture, not through just simply stoking one side of the culture war. And I think Peterson at his best, and Peterson 5 years ago, would have been more interested in that sort of synthesis or that.
Except 5 years ago when we learned about him, it was because he came out and lied about the fucking contents of Bill C-16, specifically because he was like, I don't want to be forced to use somebody's pronouns. And then they said, well, would you? And he said, yes, because he didn't want to get fired at that point. So
did he? I thought he said no.
No, he said yes. He said he just doesn't want to be forced to.
I remember the thing that he specifically said, which is, first of all, absolutely wrong. And second of all, extremely transphobic, was saying that using someone's, purposefully misgendering someone. So using the wrong pronouns, using their dead name, something like that. Purposefully misgendering someone, he said, does not harm them at all. Not mentally, not emotionally, not physically. And I'll agree it doesn't harm them physically. But if someone were to constantly refer to me as a woman, I would be pretty fucking miffed.
Not because being a woman is bad. It's just because they're clearly doing it
because I'm not a woman.
Yeah. And they're clearly doing it to piss you off.
Yeah. So if I were a trans person who identified as some gender, and someone constantly misgendered me, I would be upset at that. Rightfully so, because all you're doing by constantly misgendering someone is you're just telling them, I don't respect you. That's what you're doing.
Right.
Of nuanced argument. And increasingly now, I just see him not being interested in the nuanced argument at all, just kind of tickling the funny bone of one side of the culture war.
You've said that 3 times already.
He like that, and I don't believe that's his fundamental orientation. But I do think, and this is what I'd love to come to later in the conversation, is the impact of social media and audience capture and all of these dynamics that warp us and make us into more extreme versions of ourselves, which is what we've seen with so many public intellectuals, not just Jordan Peterson, over the last 5 years or so. Like, this is something I think so many people from, without naming any names.
Well, let's name some.
Russell,
who else?
Russell Brand. Russell Brand now, if you look at his YouTube channel, it's very clickbaity titles. It's very following the YouTube audience. It's much more conspiratorial. It's much more... it's perfectly calibrated for a YouTube audience. The nature of audience capture, particularly on YouTube, is that
Russell Brand was
what they need,
like
comments
particularly sad for me, because I used to really like the guy back in like my high school years, like 15 years ago. I used to really like the guy. No, more than 15 years. I'm aging myself, or dating myself, whatever. Anyway, I used to like Russell Brand. Turns out he's a shitbag. So I was really sad about that.
Well, the thing about him is he doesn't need the money either, right? He was in a lot of movies and stuff, and I'm pretty sure like Jordan Peterson doesn't need the money anymore either. I could see like I have more sympathy for somebody like Jeremy the Quartering because he needs the money. You know what I'm saying? No, that's just versus these people who don't.
I know what you mean.
Thread that creates.
Moral of the story is don't like anyone.
Bubbles, and I think it has a warping effect on creators. I know this myself. Maybe you do as well, as having a YouTube channel on the Unheard YouTube channel. It starts to warp, and I feel it in myself. Like, there are certain topics that I know that I'm wary about talking about, or talking about in a particular way, or self-censoring, and feeling kind of dragged more and more towards what the audience wants, and the difficulty in calibrating. I don't think people recognize, I think people realize now with films like The Social Dilemma, how toxic social media can be, how it brings out the worst in us, our narcissism, our tribalism, all of these issues, because it encourages us to keep coming back.
But then, in that being the case, the only thing to do is to lean into that and acknowledge it. And I think we do an okay job of that, especially on this show.
I don't know if the audience drags us more left or we drag the audience more left.
I'm not sure. This show, I put the brakes on you a lot of times when you start talking left right politics. Actually, we have whole ass other shows where you can do that. But I don't think we don't have a big enough audience to worry about audience capture at this point. But also, like, I don't know, I just kind of lean into it, and people go, "Oh, you're biased." I'm like, "Oh, you figured it out." It's like, thanks, good job, dude, in the chat. Thanks for figuring out that I am a biased person. You are a fucking genius.
If we're involved in an argument and it polarizes and splits society, I don't think people yet realize how impactful that is on creators, on people who are, and now, because the institutions are increasingly failing, more and more people are getting their news, their opinions.
But like what he's saying right now, first of all, that's not what happened to Jordan Peterson. He started off transphobic. Mm-hmm. From the beginning, he was transphobic. So his audience didn't drag him into transphobia. He was already there. But secondly, even for someone who didn't start off that way and their audience did drag them, that's not an excuse.
Right, that's their fault.
Yeah, you can't say like, "Oh, well, Your Honor, I may have murdered that guy, but a lot of people were telling me to do it, and I made a lot of money by doing it. So let me off the hook."
You see my Patreon?
rather than institutions. So the characteristics of those individuals, the psychological flaws of those individuals, the way they communicate, what they say, what they don't say, all of that suddenly is relevant. And so we're in a world where suddenly we're in a world of sort of shifting sands, and also where we're increasingly seeing a kind of polarizing effect of the audience that makes people into more and more extreme versions of themselves. And I would say that's what I think has happened to Jordan Peterson, is that he was.
But this has actually always been the case. Like, just think of, let's not talk about punditry, right? Let's talk about the lead singer of a band. The audience went there for a fucking show. And if they belt it out, but they're just standing there looking bored because that's kind of their normal disposition, well, the show's not going to be as good. So they fucking turn it on. Right? Because that's what you do if you're a performer.
Yep.
And this is the same dynamic. They're performing. Right now, I'm performing. You know, I try to be like true to generally who I am on the show, but right now I'm a performer. I'm an entertainer right now, to the extent that this shit is entertaining. But like the idea, like, this isn't some revelation. They used to have people be extreme versions of themselves in like gladiator fights. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, and you can't look at that video of Jordan Peterson sitting there, you know, with the lighting and his suit and think he's not trying to perform.
Right.
Like, he's absolutely trying to perform. It took him like time to set that up as a performance. And he probably planned that since before the tweet.
At least like the backdrop and stuff. Yeah, for sure. You know, backdrop. People have them. They do plan their performance. And if you're going to put on a performance, you may as well fucking plan it.
I should go grab my green screen and put it up.
Synthesis perspective 5 years ago, and has just steered more and more into what more of the audience wanted, which was just being a culture warrior. Just being a culture warrior, not attempting to kind of, not attempting to communicate beyond his own side.
Would he not say, and I should say we have asked him to be here and discuss this with us, and hopefully he will.
No, he's not. What do you mean? Oh, you mean without David Fuller there to criticize him? Oh, the light criticism from David Fuller would make me throw up.
It's not culture warrior or audience capture so much as just realizing what his position is. You know, from an initial kind of agnostic searching role, he increasingly maybe has felt confident what he believes to be closest to the truth, and therefore thinks it's virtuous and necessary to fight that battle.
Yeah.
I mean, what's wrong with that if that's what he would say?
Yeah, and I imagine he would also say, you don't realize things are really much more urgent than they were 5 years ago, and that's why I'm responding to it. Don't you realize what's going on in Canada now with the creeping authoritarianism, all of these issues? And of course there's going to be...
But how can David say that, like, this is the issue now when Jordan Peterson fucking started off saying that?
Right, it was
That's why he became famous. This is just his greatest hits album.
Right. Like it would be like, well, you know, the Intellectual Dollar Tree, you know, at the beginning, like they weren't even, I mean, they weren't making fun of any of these people. Like, I don't know. These guys sure changed. Like,
yeah, you guys changed so much since you started making fun of Sam Harris.
I'm funnier probably now. I mean, the show's probably better now, but you know, oh man.
I think our first episode was making fun of Sam Harris.
It was.
So.
I'm based in the UK. I've got a different experience than he does being in Canada. But I just don't see how you're going to, even if you believe that these are the most important issues in the world, I don't know how you think you're going to persuade anyone without, with basically yelling at them. Like, how has that ever worked in an argument when you're talking to someone, when you're not trying to kind of...
It's not about persuading people, though. Like, how does he not realize this? Jordan Peterson isn't trying to persuade anyone. Like, Jordan Peterson has a fan base. The fan base is transphobic. That's why they like him, because he's transphobic. He started off transphobic and he's transphobic now. He'll never not be transphobic as long as they're shoveling money at him.
Right. But that's not, and that's his fault still.
Yes. Yeah. To be clear, that is wrong. But how does he not see that, like, he's not trying to make an argument? Jordan Peterson isn't trying to convince anyone. I mean, to the extent that Jordan Peterson is trying to convince anyone of anything, it's to give him money. And all he has to do that for these right-wing nut jobs is to just put out more transphobic content, which is what he does. And he's really good at it. He's especially good at being a horrible, despicable human being. He is especially good at that.
And not for nothing, the term transphobia or bigotry hasn't come up once in these people's conversation. They haven't named the problem.
Yep.
They're all afraid to do that because it's a character, like a character assessment. And these people hate that shit. Very smart.
And they're
people
talking about Jordan Peterson like he's not doing exactly what he's been doing the whole time. Like, this is the issue that they have, that he's being transphobic right now, and they're not going to acknowledge that he fucking started that way.
To be fair, they're not even going to acknowledge that they have a problem with transphobia to the extent that they do, if they do.
You can find
Yeah, they're just saying, well, he's not making good arguments anymore.
This is, I just don't see, even if you think this is the most important issue in the world, I don't think bringing that into your delivery and intensely kind of yelling at people is the way to do it. And I think back in the day, before he was consumed by this culture war dynamic, and again, like, I have huge empathy for and admiration for Jordan Peterson for what he brought back in 2017.
And by that he means viewers to his channel, pensioners who would pay him $700 for a hyperventilation class.
And I understand. I mean, he, as I said, the one-man lightning rod for the culture war. You can't go through what he's gone through without having some effect. So it feels uncomfortable talking about him because he's.
Well, like, what was the effect?
I've only met him twice.
Like, did he become more transphobic? Like, is he trying to say that, like, Jordan Peterson went from this, like, kind, loving, and caring and accepting person to this horrible monster? No, he was already the horrible monster.
Right, it's just David.
You had him on your show, David Fuller, when he was a horrible monster.
More than once.
So, like, don't, like, try and sit here and say, like, Jordan Peterson's changed and now I don't like him anymore. No, he became too toxic for your brand is what happened.
Right. And yeah, my God.
Contact, because of the two documentaries that I did, and the amazing coincidence that he was on Channel 4 News, where I used to work for 10 years, and then rose to fame with the interview with Kathy Newman. So there's kind of a real shared history. And I feel as uncomfortable talking about him because he's a person. He's a person I've met. He's a person everyone has sympathy for because he's been so open about his struggle.
Wait, everybody? I don't have any sympathy for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I have zero sympathy for Jordan Peterson. None at all. In fact, I think I have negative sympathy for Jordan Peterson. If that's possible, is that possible? If it's not possible, then I'm transcending the possibility of not having negative or having, you know what I mean?
you're transcending sympathy.
Yeah.
It actually your transcendence of sympathy might actually distort space and time.
And that's part of what people identify with it, is that he's a real person.
He's falling short, you feel like. It's fair to say.
It's not for me to judge whether he's falling short. All I can say is, like, my experience and what I've seen with the different groups of people who've been tracking his trajectory. I would say the universal response to the article that I put out from the people that I respect, recognize, and have connected with over the trajectory of Jordan Peterson has been, thank you for saying this. No one's saying it because he's now such a kingmaker, because he's now got...
Tons of people were saying it.
My response always to Jordan Peterson has been, fuck you for saying this.
Right. Well, he's saying that people thanked him for saying things about Jordan Peterson. And when he caveated it with people, the people I respect, this and that, weren't saying any of this like, out loud. It's like, well, that doesn't mean nobody was saying it. Just because you don't respect the intellectual Dollar Tree and only blocked me when I mentioned that you were taking a bunch of money from pensioners, and you don't respect Sam Cedar, you all are scared to death of Sam Cedar. You don't respect David Pakman. You don't respect the people at the Young Turks. You don't respect the countless journalists, many of whom have been women and queer people who have been writing about the trajectory of Jordan Peterson this whole time. You respect intellectual dark web dorks and sense makers.
So much power, because the nature of the alternative media is this kind of invisible hierarchy of status where people are hopeful that they might get him on their podcast or they'll be on his podcast. People don't, the alternative media, people don't speak out. There's so many corrupting factors in the alternative media. There's so many corrupting factors in the mainstream media as well. Like, this is one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson has been successful, Rebel Wisdom has been successful, Unheard has been successful, is that the media became corrupt and became a kind of parody of truth-seeking, but there's real problems in the alternative as well.
I want to come on to the whole question of the alternative media and whether that can be fixed. But just to finish on Jordan Peterson, we actually had Dave Rubin.
Nobody wants to finish on Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. We actually had Dave Rubin on this show, and I was asking very similar questions to what you're saying. I said, well, you used to be this sort of open-minded, intellectual dark web character, and now I think he would and did openly say he's very much a conservative. He has a very clear view of the world, and he's fighting to win. And he said that. He said, basically, that he's given up on the existing institutions as being fair arbiters for these sort of struggles. And he thinks whole new institutions need to be created. And there reaches a point, and I think maybe Jordan Peterson has got to a similar place, where it becomes about winning. And they think that the contribution they can make is bigger and more impactful to be fighters on one side. I mean, I guess I have to ask, what's wrong with that? Maybe that is true. Maybe.
But this guy's like almost taking his own agency out of this, because this guy, we don't do much of this because I don't think this guy's a good interviewer, and he's like the fucking C or D team of the IDW, right? Whereas David Fuller's like the B team. And but he only interviews it's the trigonometry thing, right? Where he, like, 90% of his interview guests are like right-wing culture warriors. And then he acts like he has no agency in that, and that he is not part of that like ecosystem, because he's just the interviewer. It's the same shit Konstantin Kisin tries to say, like that he's just interviewing these people and that he doesn't, endorse or answer for them. And it's like, well, if all you're doing is an interview show, what are we supposed to do here, buddy? Like, what are we where are we supposed to draw our conclusions from?
And he and Konstantin, what's his last name?
Kisin.
Yeah. They both, like, through their interviews of these people, all they're doing is propping them up and trying to make them look good.
Well, everybody's propping everybody else up, right? It's like all dumb ships rise with the dumb water.
But, like, if you're just tossing softballs the entire time, if you're not being critical of someone during an interview like this, then, all you're doing is promoting them.
Right. And that's the question that nobody ever, like, David Fuller's not going to take an interview with somebody who's going to ask him, well, aren't you part of this problem? Didn't you help build the thing? Like, even Chris Kavanaugh from Decoding the Gurus doesn't ever ask these fucking people that. And he'd be the most likely one that they will talk to who'd ask that, but I don't know.
It might, you might be sad because the kind of, lofty, sort of liberal-minded character is no more, but maybe he is more useful to the world as a combative member of one side.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I understand why. I mean, Dave Rubin is another good example, but Dave Rubin, as far as I can tell, has kind of vanished from the conversation by picking a side. I don't see him being.
That would be news to Dave Rubin.
Right. And to be fair, just because you won't talk to Dave Rubin anymore because you realize that he is incredibly stupid, which you won't say, It doesn't mean that he's vanished from the conversation. He's more popular than ever.
Yeah. Yeah, even more so would be news to Dave Rubin's fans.
Right.
He's just.
I mean, honestly, there are a lot of things that are obvious to you and me that are probably news to Dave Rubin, but that's a whole different conversation.
A very small echo chamber of people on his side of the aisle. I don't see, like, Dave Rubin, where is he now? Like, he's not part of the conversation. Jordan Peterson was. And I understand why they've, if that's where Jordan Peterson has ended up. I've not heard him say that explicitly. For a long time back in 2017, 2018, he was being framed as being a right winger, and he would say, I'm not a right winger. I'm not a, he's on record as saying, I'm being framed as a right winger, and I'm not.
Yeah, he would say that, but he acted just like a right wing reactionary.
And Jordan Peterson, being a Christian, should know you know them by their deeds.
So, like, you know, if I'm currently hacking someone to death with an axe, and David Fuller asks me, "Oh, are you an axe murderer?" And I say, "Oh, no. A lot of people are framing me as an axe murderer, but I'm not an axe murderer."
This is actually
David
a hatchet.
Fuller just be like, "Oh, he's not an axe murderer then."
Yeah, that's technically a hatchet.
The conversation. If he has decided,
all right, fine, I'll settle for that. Hatchet murderer.
All we can do now is fight. I don't think that works. I don't think that's how you persuade people. I guess I still have a faith that that there is still an opportunity for dialogue, and I don't see that happening.
So I wonder whether this is actually a symptom of, as you call them, incentive structures, audience capture, features of the new media ecosystem.
Well, you'd think that a person who's a psychologist would be aware of those things. Just a guess. just putting that out there.
Social media, feedback loops, etc. Or whether it's just a human reality. And maybe it was always like that. We are built to form groups. In fact, I'm sure Jordan Peterson would agree with that. And it's very deep in our way of thinking. And that's how we're at our best in some ways. You need to be surrounded by people who, to some degree, reflect back what you think, and that you can kind of grow together with some kind of coherence. And you form tribes, you form groups of thinkers or warriors or whatever they are. And that's how human beings have always progressed. So maybe the kind of liberal or the...
But like the logical question to ask for that would be, is that good?
I mean, what he's saying here isn't wrong.
No, I agree with him, but the question would be, is that good?
I think...
Is it good to do that? Is it good to be excessively tribal? Or tribal at all? Is it good to be tribal?
I think that we're the descendants of people who would have died if they weren't tribal.
Sure, but does that mean that we should be tribal? To a certain extent, you know, we should be. You know, you should care about your family. You should care about your community. But should we be so tribal that, you know, we silo ourselves off from anyone that we don't agree with? Like, I think the tribality, I think the tribality of people can sometimes be excessive, and we should be teaching people how to be less tribal.
Trying to understand all sides is actually quite an unnatural, hard position to sustain for very long, because it's quite inhuman, and eventually it becomes too exhausting, and you feel like there's something more flowing and profound about sort of picking a team. Maybe it's not social media. Maybe it's just human beings.
But I would say the two things are not mutually exclusive. It is human beings. It is psychology. The nature of social media is that Silicon Valley has got these incredibly sophisticated tools to mine our psychology and to prey on our tribalism, to magnify our tribalism. The issue is that
before Silicon Valley, it was just Madison Avenue, baby. It ain't nothing new.
Are effective in groups of mixed temperament and mixed ability. That's the idea. Tribalism is actually an existential threat, because it's splitting us off into camps of different perspectives rather than allowing us to come together. That's why we have the different temperaments, which is again something in a way I took from Jordan Peterson, was that by those different temperaments, those different abilities, what on the left to be more open, on the conservative side to be more disciplined, more conscientious, we have to come together in groups of these mixed temperaments. What we're seeing is increased polarization, increased fragmentation by social media mining our innate biases and fragmenting us off into groups where I think we become ineffective. And society itself, I think, is breaking down, particularly in America. I think we're in a different position here in the UK, and I have more hope. I think there is a civil space in the UK outside the culture war, outside the sense of politicization and fragmentation. In America, I don't think there is. I think America is in a very dark place. And I just see stuff like this as adding to it, as fueling it. And I don't see the kind of... Peterson used to talk a lot about like the danger of dehumanizing language, the danger of...
Oh, shut the fuck up. Peterson was always using dehumanizing language against queer people the whole time.
Yep. That's how he got famous.
These unexamined kind of disgust. And yet I'm picking up a huge amount of disgust, a huge amount of borderline dehumanizing language in a lot of what he's putting out at the moment. And I don't see... He has said before, I don't know how you resolve those kind of divisions in anything short of conflict. And I think he's fueling one side of the conflict. I think that's effectively, if he's decided that's what needs to happen, he's decided that actually he and Dave Rubin decided that what's required is actually a civil war or actually or just to win the culture war.
Isn't politics sort of agonistic or combative by nature, and ultimately one group needs to win the argument? The idea that everything is always a compromise between all groups thinking differently has never really been true. Maybe that's what they're doing. They plan to win. They don't plan to persuade. They plan to win. I can't speak for them, but is that a frightening thought, do you think?
Again, it's understandable, and everything that I'm seeing and you're saying looks like that's the decision that he's made.
I'm not even sure that Jordan Peterson cares about winning. I think Jordan Peterson cares about money.
Maybe, I mean, he's got so much damn money now that maybe it's more about his ego and like fame or power.
Yeah, it could be that. You're right.
I'm telling you, that dude was pulling in 50, 60 grand a month on Patreon for a while. He's
a lot of people though, they never are happy with the money that they have. You know, they always want more. You know, the uber wealthy, the ultra rich, they always want more. And I'm saying that, you know, as a sweeping generalization because it's true. You don't get ultra rich without always wanting more.
And I think, again, at some point, maybe the money becomes about the power that the money gives you, right? Like,
well, yeah. No one wants money because they want to like swim around in gold coins.
Right, or just
that
to go buy all the bread
if you
or
dived
whatever.
into that.
Like, yeah, they're not like, oh, I can buy all the bread in the store now. You know what I'm saying? Like, my material needs are extra met now, you know?
I'm disappointed that he's made, and one that I think a lot of the people that a lot of the people who've been following him and I've been tracking in these various groups, I think thought that he was up to something different. They thought he wasn't just a culture warrior. If that's the role that he's now fully embraced, then that is, yeah.
Why the fuck would you think that?
Let's talk about
what about him said that he wasn't a culture warrior in 2017?
I just missing from this whole discussion actually is like that he just lied. Like they mentioned C16, but they didn't mention that they didn't even say that he was incorrect. Right?
Yeah.
Like lying implies like, you know, an intent or whatever. So maybe they don't want to ascribe ill intent to old fucking Beef and Benzo's Jordy Pete. But they didn't even say that he was wrong about it.
Yeah.
Media or heterodox media. You're shutting down Rebel Wisdom. is that in some way an expression of disappointment at the state of alternative media? I mean, what should we be doing that we're not?
It's not solely because of that. It's partly because I feel like the narrative arc that I was following on the media channel with Rebel Wisdom is complete. I don't really know where to go. I've got quite a few things that I'm putting out between now and the end of the project in November, but I feel like the narrative arc that I was tracking around things like existential risk, personal growth, and kind of heterodox thought is complete. And also I do feel like the heterodox space itself became very warped, especially during COVID. I've talked about the alternative media, this kind of concept of the uncanny valley between the mainstream and the alternative. We've got a mainstream that is not open to enough voices. It's trying to gatekeep the conversation. And
shut up. You were trying to gatekeep all you talked to were IDW people, dude.
Yep.
Doesn't include enough voices. And then you've got the alternative, which will
Gatekeeper complains about gatekeeping,
voices, but there's no incentive to challenge them. So particularly during COVID, you had, because a lot of this became very heated, very weaponized, because the information landscape or information around COVID had huge health implications. The mainstream not including enough perspectives, as you know from some of the problems that you had with Unheard. But the alternative rarely had any incentive to challenge the people that they were bringing on. Controversial figures like Robert Malone, I've never seen him in conversation with a medical figure who's equipped to challenge his perspective. Other kind of people who became very, very prominent, very successful because of the narrative that they were kind of pushing.
Who are you thinking about?
Robert Malone, Peter McCullough, some of the figures who... There was a whole controversy over Joe Rogan when Joe Rogan hosted those voices. And it ended up being an attempt to kind of cancel Joe Rogan, and there was the whole kind of racism thing, which I think was very cynical. But
why was it cynical? Why was it cynical to be like, oh, he's also racist and has a long history of saying the N-word on his show? That's not cynical. That's just the truth.
Yeah, that's the truth, and it's a valid criticism.
Right. Just because the first criticism was that he's platforming misinformation people doesn't mean that you can't be like, oh, and I have another one. It's like, I can only go get a tomato at the store today. I can't also get some lettuce.
How am I going to make my BLT then?
A simple fact of Joe Rogan hosting these voices, he's not equipped to challenge them, but then who is equipped to challenge them? Where is a place that's equipped to I don't think it's enough just to host these voices and not take any responsibility for the information that they're putting out.
The thing is that the people equipped to challenge these people aren't necessarily going to be medical professionals. The people equipped to challenge these people are going to be people who are like conspiracy researchers and extremism researchers and people who understand propaganda. It's going to be people who have been watching the culture war, watching the anti-vaccine movement as it goes down. And most medical professionals don't have the fucking time to do it. The only ones that do that I know of, and I mean, there are others, but the ones that are prominent who do are the people that work at science-based medicine. But you better bet Robert Malone wasn't never going to talk to no Steven Novella or David Gorski.
Yep.
No, sir.
So I think there has to be some... We talked about kind of the lack of institutions.
Yeah, not for nothing. Chat just mentioned that Joe Rogan got $100 million signing bonus or whatever from Spotify. You'd think he could hire up some staff to make it so that he could be armed with the information that he needed to question people who were making claims, if that was something he was interested in.
If Joe Rogan were a journalist, his show would be very different, but he's not. He's an entertainer. His show is entertainment. It's not information. Like, it's not news. His show is just entertainment. It's like getting your medical advice from like Rocco's Modern Life.
I bet Rocco's Modern Life during this pandemic would have had good messaging.
Yeah, it would have. Yep.
kind of new institutions where we are challenging some of these voices. At the moment, the mainstream is just saying, we're not going to touch this. But once people get to a certain level of prominence, I think there has to be a need to kind of interrogate the truth of their claims. And I don't see anywhere that's trying to do that. Not in the alternative, not in the mainstream. And I don't see...
I mean, not to blow on Herd's trumpet here, but we definitely have been trying.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an editorial judgment you need to make on who you're going to invite onto your show, definitely.
Yeah.
And there were lots of people suggested we should have on during COVID, and we didn't. And some of those people have become very prominent since, and you make a judgment at the time.
Yeah.
I feel ultimately that the audience trusts.
You said that like that makes it
the editor to
a
make
mistake, though.
Right.
Like, just because someone eventually becomes prominent doesn't mean you should have had them on your show. Like, what if they become prominent for being like a fucking Nazi?
Right. And
then you shouldn't have had them on your show, and you should be fucking proud that you didn't have them on your show.
Right. I don't think he meant that he made a mistake by not having them on, but he also didn't say, and I don't care if they became prominent, I'm not going to have people on who are going to lie to my audience.
Okay. He's just talking about it like wistfully, like, oh, and then they became prominent.
Oh yeah. That's the thing is one of the tactics that this whole sort of heterodox sphere or whatever they'll use, because then you and I will have a different interpretation of what they said when we're listening to it. And that way they never really said anything. He didn't say shit there then, did he? Because you and me don't even agree on what he just said. We agree on the words that he said, but we don't agree on what the fuck he probably meant.
Yeah.
And that's the point of some of this, I think, is to like obfuscate.
Yeah.
Those decisions, and they might be wrong, they might be right. But if someone else, like Joe Rogan or Brett Weinstein or anyone else, comes to a different view, I'm happy to disagree with it, but I don't think ban it. I wouldn't, and I wouldn't necessarily even judge them too harshly for having come to a different point of view. I think that's the whole idea, that you should be allowed different people's judgment, and audience will flow to whoever they think ultimately comes closest to the truth.
That seems like a very dangerous idea, because if their view is you should, for example, inject bleach into your veins, then I think you very much should judge them for coming to that view, because that view is ridiculous.
Right. And the other thing is he's leaving out the editorial decision of who to put on, right? If you put on a bunch of people who have like one point of view, be it right or wrong, whether or not you explicitly endorse that point of view, you've endorsed that point of view. Unless you have them on to debate them.
Yeah. If you just have them on to talk about their point of view, that's endorsement.
Yeah, I'm more concerned with whether people are, for example, if you're hosting people from both sides of the argument. You mentioned Brett Weinstein. I had a quite difficult experience because Brett was a friend, and I disagreed mainly with the fact that he wouldn't host anyone from the counterpoint. He was hosting people like Robert Malone. He was asking questions about ivermectin and making very strong statements about ivermectin, like it was a 100% effective prophylactic against COVID. At very important times during the pandemic, he went on Joe Rogan with Pierre Corey, and they made a lot of statements about the effectiveness of ivermectin that I think have proven not to be the case. Now people are saying, well, maybe it has a small effect here or there, and there's an argument.
You would take it.
But those are the people that are backpedaling from their initial position, you idiot. Those aren't like the people who were like, hey, there's no scientific evidence for this thing being effective in any way against COVID. None of those people have come over to well, there's some small effect. No, it's the people who were out there fucking loud and proud about it, who want to like maintain some air of credibility to the extent that they can. They're going to backpedal it and be like, oh, the studies weren't as strong as I thought they were, but there does still seem to be something here, but yada, yada, yada. Those are the people backpedaling, dude. Those aren't like the fucking, it's not like Steven Novella came out and he's like, well, it seems like there's some, some efficacy here, or like, Peter Hotez or some, some like, just some prominent virologist or something that was like, no, this doesn't seem to work. Please don't do this. You're hurting other people who actually need this drug. by sucking up all the supply. You know, the people who were saying that, none of the people were like, well, you were like a little 3% right. No.
Yeah, the medical community, the only community you should be listening to for medical advice, is continuing to say what they have said the entire time, that there is not enough evidence to say that ivermectin is effective as a prophylactic against COVID-19. So, therefore, you shouldn't rely on it as one.
Right. And it was just, I don't even know. I can't imagine like sitting here, like these two, both of them, to some extent, have like propped up the very people they're talking about. But the way that he's like, oh, Brett was my friend and it made me sad. And it's like, well, I thought you were searching for the truth, not for like a bestie. What the fuck? Like, I don't need to have like a bunch of friends who I met because of this show. In fact, I think that's fairly unhealthy. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. And then you end up not being critical of people that you should be critical of.
Yep. I think if no one ever comes off of your show upset at how it went, then probably you're just promoting everyone.
Right. And you can't say that about me. I've left a trail of fucking destruction in my wake. I fucked up a bunch of people who came in here thinking I was stupid. Oops.
Here, which he was recently.
Yeah.
Probably.
Would he still say it was 100% effective at preventing COVID?
You would have to
I
ask
doubt
him.
it.
Yeah.
But he has not still, to this day, hosted anyone on his program. A medical voice is equipped to challenge his claims around ivermectin or vaccines. I don't think, for me, that's not ethical truth-seeking. And I know Joe Rogan wrestles with that and does have people, try to have people from both sides to a greater degree. But
no, that's not true. Like during COVID, the only person he had on was Sanjay Gupta, and Sanjay Gupta was not prepared for the fucking bullshit Rogan was going to throw at him.
Yeah, I would say David's just wrong here. Joe Rogan is the problem.
Right. He's not.
He is absolutely part of the problem.
Right.
Will make their judgments over the actions of the people who are making the decisions in the alternative media space. But what I'm pointing at is there's no incentive for anyone in the alternative media space to host people from the other side. Their audience don't like it.
But that's not true. Dude, they fucking kicked the Majority Report out of the podcast awards because it kept winning. And Sam Cedar will talk to people he disagrees with. He's like, libertarians, call my show now.
What he means to say is that Joe Rogan's audience doesn't like it when Joe Rogan has someone on who keeps dunking on Joe Rogan.
To be fair, that doesn't really happen.
And I would agree. Like a lot of these people in the alternative media space or whatever, when they have someone on who disagrees with them, specifically the kind of people he's talking about that spread misinformation, when they have someone on that disagrees with them, they just get absolutely fucking dunked on. And then, yeah, their audience doesn't like it. And a lot of times their audience will be like, hey, I think I'm not going to be your fan anymore because you're very clearly wrong.
Yeah. I think that one of the main problems is that they don't want to have, when they say people who disagree with them, right? They almost all say it. They don't even like act like it's not true. They don't want anybody who's going to be combative.
Yeah.
They want somebody who's going to be, boy, isn't it great that we're having this conversation before they disagree? And it's like, well, no, if I'm talking to fucking David Fuller, this isn't going to be too hot for either of us, to be perfectly honest. I'm going to probably fucking absolutely wreck David Fuller, but it's going to be frustrating to talk to him, right? So I'm not glad, it's not one of them situations, right?
They especially don't want someone on who is both going to be combative and going to be right,
and possibly might impugn the character of the host. By being like, well, I see this pattern of behavior that you're doing, and it occurs to me that maybe your character is poor.
So, like, in that way, I guess David's right here. There is no incentive for that for the alternative media people. There's no incentive for that. So, like, what do we do about that? How do we fix the fact that you can rise to prominence and you can gain a huge following without ever confronting any criticism? You know, how about we start with Tucker Carlson?
You know, to be fair, Tucker has people on who disagree with him a lot more than any of these fuckers do. But then he yells at them.
People on Fox News, the reporters on Fox News, reporters in like heavy quotes. Those quotes are doing a lot of heavy lifting there. The pundits on Fox News, yes, they'll have people on who disagree with them, but when it gets too obvious that the host is losing, they just cut those people off and they never have them on again.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to go on. If you're going to dunk on Tucker, you better bring your best dunk, because you're only going to get one shot.
Yep.
There's no reason to ask them difficult questions. That means they might not come back on. You've got all of these kind of warping effects of the alternative media.
I'm thinking through what you're saying, and I know exactly what you mean, and I understand the attraction of this kind of impartial figure, or someone who is constantly open to the other side. I suppose in reality, I'm not sure it's about the corruption or audience capture so much, but people do become known for more one side than the other. And at that point, perhaps they feel that their contribution is to correct the overall discussion space by bringing a particular point of view to the table. If, for example, the mainstream media, every BBC, CNBC, any channel in the US are showing the same experts time and time again, and they're just everywhere, what is the merit of bringing those people on? They probably won't come anyway. And if they do, you're then going to have some sort of discussion with them that might not go that well.
Okay.
Is that a realistic thing to ask, I wonder, of a kind of alternative media space, that they present themselves BBC-like, or, in some kind of theoretical impartiality, which of course is never possible anyway? Or maybe it's just more realistic to say, and as I keep saying, more human, to say that as long as people are kind of transparent about their vantage point, that's actually a more real way to conduct a public conversation, where guests, hosts, editors are all known to come from somewhere, because everyone has a view. We know that from every BBC journalist. We see it on their Twitter profile, what they really think half the time. And maybe that's a more honest way to have the discussion than this pretense at impartiality. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's true that the mainstream was always a pretense at impartiality. I think the rise of the alternative media has kind of shown up that the kind of view from nowhere affectation of the mainstream was always an affectation. I think that's really helpful.
But that's because that's their job. If somebody's doing like reporting, their job is to basically be like, this is, these are the facts, here's what's going on. There are also people who do opinion. We are an opinion channel. We're not journalists. So we're not telling you that we have the view from nowhere. So, like, I don't understand. It's just a difference, a difference in what you're doing. If you're a pundit, then you're a pundit. You're there to give your opinion. And if you're a reporter, you're supposed to be reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And newspapers have both. And you know which one's which because of what it says at the top of the fucking page on the newspaper. It says this is the opinion fucking section. This is the op-eds, like.
Yep.
Or at least that's supposed to be what happens. Of course, that doesn't always happen, but whatever. Like, perfection is a dumb goal. So
it's kind of shown up that there was people talk about the MSM, which I think is a oversimplification, but there's some truth in it. That there was a kind of narrowness of the conversation. The fact that the alternative media has kind of expanded the types of views and types of perspectives you can find is fantastic. But what I fear is that we're all just getting siloed more and more in bubbles of mutual incomprehension. And that has an effect on the creators. The creators, I think, get trapped in a particular perspective, and they then start not seeking to grow, to learn, to kind of improve their understanding, and then improving the understanding of the people who are following them. I feel that we're just trapped in kind of ever decreasing circles, because that's what the audience wants, that's what the algorithms reward. And I think ultimately that's a really dangerous thing, because if you don't have, we're literally in a situation now where we don't understand each other. We don't even understand how people can think the way that they think. We're in mutual incomprehension, and I don't see how a society survives with this level of fragmentation, this level of mutual incomprehension. And I think it's worse. As I said, I think it's probably worse in America. My experience is that the conversation's so much more polarized and more fragmented there than it is here. But I see it as a fundamental problem, because how do you have collective action to solve? We've got huge problems as a society, as a culture. And if we can't come to any agreement on what those problems are, and we can't even have discussions with each other about what those problems are, I think that's a really, really dangerous thing for the future of any kind of common purpose, whether that's democracy.
You know what? I think we got to cut it off somewhere for the pod. So this is as good a place as any, because what he said is, if we can't, keep having the discussions about this. Well, like, at what point does the discussion end when we found the answer?
Yeah, I do think he's right in that, like, the problem here is the algorithms. Like, the problem here isn't that people are inherently becoming more polarized. The problem here is that people are being pushed to become more polarized by these social media companies. And it's because more polarized people generate more money.
Right. If you get people that are always outraged at everything they're seeing and they're always mad, they're going to stay in that comment thread.
Yep.
I mean, I'm guilty of it. Actually, no, I pretty much now I'll be like, once I realize that I'm not going to get anywhere with somebody, I just call them a dumb fuck and don't talk, and like, just don't talk, because like, I don't know the person, right? So fucking who cares? But
yeah,
also, like, I just, he's like, we have all these big problems, and we could have let it roll a little bit, but he wouldn't have mentioned climate change. He certainly wouldn't have brought up the rise in the far right and violence from the far right in the United States over the last 20 years or 30 years or whatever it's been, where it's the FBI has been like, hey, this is a problem. Hey, this is a problem. Not that we love the FBI. It's just that they tend to get it right. They tend to. They're not your local police force. They're not fucking Keystone Cops. They have people like researching things that are going on in our society. And so it's like, for climate change, we already have the answer. We know what the problem is that we're dumping too much fucking CO2 into the atmosphere, and it's increasing the average temperature on the planet, and that is making weather more volatile. It's melting the ice caps. The oceans are going to rise a little bit, very slowly. We're probably never going to notice it in our lifetimes. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't, but hurricanes might become, hurricanes are more intense. This last set of storms we had in California might have been more intense because of climate change. You can never attribute one specific thing to it. The idea is that we're able to attribute like a pattern to it.
Yeah.
And the pattern seems to be in line with what people were predicting 20 years ago. So it seems like we had the fucking answer 20 years ago. So maybe now we should stop sense making about it. Maybe.
Yeah. You are right in that he's not going to bring that up.
Right. But that's because once you have the answer to once you know what the problem is, now it's time to fix it. He said, we're never going to fix these problems. Well, it's no, we're not, David, because you and your weird friends are just going to keep fucking sniffing each other's farts about shit that other people already figured out the answer to.
And to the extent that he's he's right about something, the algorithm isn't interested in fixing these problems. In fact, the algorithm works better at producing more money for Facebook and Twitter and YouTube if the problems aren't fixed.
Right. Even if we already know the answer, that doesn't sell any ads.
Yep.
Well, that's been the intellectual Dollar Tree for the podcast listeners. Live listeners, sit tight. HK, you want to read the show out?
Yeah, we do this show every week at 7 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday. And you can find our other shows at echoplexmedia.com. And if you want to support the shows, you can support us at patreon.com/echoplex. This is Boomers by Periscope.
Can't get enough Echoplex and want to keep the conversation going with the hosts and community when we're not live? Then join our Discord server at discord.me/echoplex. We have text channels, voice channels, meme repositories, and a whole section of screenshots that we don't even remember where they came from. Come join the Now Space on Discord at discord.me/echoplex.